Hey you, yes you, stop feeling guilty about all those years you spent dicking around, reading manga and watching anime non-stop. Just stop it, okay? Hey, did you stop? Okay, good. Look man, it wasn't all a waste of time, okay? You were just in your training arc, that's okay, alright? You were just learning pattern recognition skills that, entrepreneurs and creators, they spend years trying to learn. I used to be a mental coacher myself, okay? So I'm gonna yap about some of the advantages you didn't know you had that could help you get started on your brand business this year, all right? By the way, did you know that the average Japanese spends 500 hours a year watching anime according to Statista? I'm gonna bet here you spend at least 500 hours in a month, okay? If you're anything like me. But anyway, you've seen a cool manga panel. You've seen the same cool anime fights over and over again, So much so that I believe you have acquired taste. This means that you have an amazing grasp at how good and dynamic visual communication should look like. That's why when you see something that is not communicated well visually, you immediately notice it. Even if you can put it into words, you inherently know something is wrong. Kind of like your own uncanny value, but for composition and pacing. And do you want to hear something crazy? People spend $500 an hour for a good web designer or a brand consultant who has like a respectable and unique taste. They went to college and studied for years to get that taste and a good reputation in the market. Meanwhile, you've been sitting on your ass getting a PhD level training on information architecture for free. You know, a good, well-done manga page has like 3 to 8 panels, and each panel delivers a different emotional beat, different plot points, and a visual rhythm, all while maintaining a really good clarity. And at the base level, you need the same skill to design good landing pages, pitch decks, and social media content that actually converts. By the way, here's a good tip for landing pages and social media design that actually converts. Keeping it simple will always bring a better outcome. This isn't always easy, but the goal is to always communicate what you need the most simple and clear way possible. In manga, this means that a panel doesn't have to be perfectly drawn to communicate what it needs. The same goes for a landing page, a YouTube thumbnail, or a social media post. It doesn't have to be perfectly designed. And if you've already spent your life watching anime and reading manga, you already know what that looks like. And here's another thing you learn. You learned that being cringe ain't that big a deal if you're being yourself. Here's what I mean by be yourself though. If you're in your 30s, I think you already learned this, that there's a big difference between being a cringe edgelord who has no social cues and being true to yourself when people around you are just LARPing, trying to be cool instead of just being themselves. You can 100% be yourself while still being respectful to people and the environment you're in. And there are so many characters that taught you this perfectly. Naruto is one of the best examples of this. Even though he was mocked his whole life, Naruto never pretended to be someone else and hid his desire to be acknowledged. He wore his dreams on becoming a Hokage on his sleeve, and the whole time he never compromised. Then there's Yusuke from Yu Yu Hakusho, which is like a delinquent guy who really didn't care about much, but at the same time he did care about people. He's a great example of what you see is what you get, and that authenticity is like your biggest strength. But the best example for me is Onizuka from Great Teacher Onizuka. What makes him special is that the entire premise of his character is built on the tension between who he is and who the world expects him to be. He's a former delinquent, openly perverted, reckless, and completely unpolished. And then he goes and steps into one of the most socially inflexible systems ever, the Japanese school system. He wins his students over because he doesn't hide what he is. He meets them with the same rawness they have, which is something like a polished, correct teacher, never could do. And under that rawness, he has an extremely good moral core. That's why he does insane things for his students. An average person will think of strategies on how to reach them, but not him, man. He just goes because that's just who he is. He's the best inspiration ever, man. But I understand not everybody can be like that, and if you think you're not at that point in your life yet where you think you can be that honest or you know yourself, here's a cool secret that you might know already. Try to be a creator or entrepreneur is like a speed run to get there faster. When it comes to being an entrepreneur, you have no choice but to get out of your comfort zone for a lot of things. This is gonna feel awkward and cringe, but the more you practice, the better you're gonna be at it. A good example of this is public speaking or speaking to a camera like what I'm doing right now. But You know what? That's not even the best thing you learn about manga and anime that gives you a boost ahead of everybody. The best and coolest thing we have learned is that no other medium teaches you better about never giving up. That is one of the biggest advantages we have, because we grew up with these positive themed stories, out of Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, One Piece, Yu Yu Hakusho, Senseiya. At least for me, Senseiya is like a huge one for me. All of these stories taught us that no matter what happens, no matter how many times you fall, you just dust yourself off and start again. You just never give up. Which, by the way, this is why I really hate popular stories nowadays that are just about the opposite. A lot of anime, manga, and especially Western stories that are really popular, their theme is just being about how dark the world is and about vengeance and that the world should burn. The kids growing up nowadays with those stories, might grow up with a completely different worldview. But back to about never giving up. Yeah, sure, those ideals can be unrealistic and even delusional, but if you read and learn about successful entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, Jensen Huang from Nvidia, Jeff Bezos, you're gonna learn that every single one of those guys had a good degree of delusion. You can't have an impact if you just want mediocre results. Of course, you can judge about how good or bad those impacts are being to society. That's up to you to form your own opinion, but you can't argue about the amount of effort and the amount of grit those guys have been through, to be where they are. I really think you need to have a large enough vision that most people around you will think you're just dumb and delusional. I'm on the mindset of failing upwards, where if you aim for the biggest outcome, you're gonna have a way bigger result than if you were just thinking small. And listen, I'm not telling you here to not have common sense. You gotta feed yourself and your family if you have one. But there needs to be an amount of self-belief in there. There are gonna be failures and obstacles in the way, but like Goku or Luffy, just never give up, man. You gotta think your mission is that important, and you gotta believe in yourself. And I believe in you too, man. You can do it. Also, you might not know this yet, but I'm on a mission to prove to you and to myself that anyone passionate enough with a clear mission and consistency can earn 1 million in 1 year with their brand. And I'm doing this with my channel, recording my progress and writing a newsletter and a merch brand. So you should stick around to see if I can make it. But hey, all these qualities and advantages are nice, but if you haven't started yet, none of this matters. So why the hell haven't you started yet? I made a video that should help you figure this out, and you can watch this next, right? So just start, man. Best of luck.